What?
It's time now for My Two Favorite Librarians, brought to you by the Copper Tree Boutique in Dales Grand Market, located in beautiful, historic downtown Amherst.
Hi, this is My Two Favorite Librarians. I'm not Denise Corey. I'm Chantel Taylor. And joining me today is fan favorite, Adam Davies.
Oh, now the pressure's on. Hello.
So Denise is away today, so we've had to do an emergency recording using Adam, and our subject is books published in 2020.
Yes.
So this is definitely a Denise Pop Sugar Challenge, and she's not even here to discuss it. And I chose Adam because as the person who catalogs all the books, he touches everything that comes through the door. So he sees everything.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
And I think he reads a lot of it too. He flips through. Don't nod your head.
I try to. Yes, I do peek into almost every book that goes through.
Which is fun.
Yeah, which is an idea of what we have in the collection.
If I was doing that job, I'd be totally.
Yeah.
Every time we weed, it's like, don't read the books. Don't read the books. Weed the. We have to get through this. We have to get through this. Okay. So 2020.
All you can do is sigh.
For me, and we discussed this a little bit before we started recording, I had a big chunk of really 3 months from March until May where I was hardly reading anything at all just because nothing made me happy. I couldn't really concentrate on things. I tried to reread and it was just no, I don't want any of this. So what about you?
Something similar. I ended up doing a lot of online reading. Just because I couldn't get into the library to grab materials. So I was doing a lot of online reading and went into a lot of wormholes about reading reports on this and what's been published on that and kind of catching up on that nonfiction material. I also had the advantage that a lot of the societies I belong to, a lot of their books had arrived right at the beginning of the year. So it was a perfect opportunity to read a lot of nonfiction material, baronial law, admiralty law. That's from a Scottish society. A lot on bishops' registers, which are fascinating things to read. So it fills the time.
All right, Adam. All right. Okay, so books published in 2020. So for me, I buy books for the library for children and young adult. And although, yes, I obviously do buy a few things for adults when I see things that were missing. For the most part, I'm throwing myself back into children's and youth collections, which has been a real shift in gears for me.
Right.
And there's not a lot. I used to read a lot of young adult fiction, and in the last couple of years, I'm just meh.
So much of it follows. Do you find the same themes popping up over and over again?
Yeah, the dystopian is really a horse that they're beating into the ground, and I'm I'm done with it.
Yes.
I was done with it when it started. Please stop. And I find there's a lot of fantasy happening right now in young adult fiction, which is not bad. It's just not something that I necessarily want to read all the time.
And there's a lot of urban fantasy that seems to be coming to the fore that's carrying with it a lot of issues of social justice, social repair, which are incredibly important.
That is sometimes a big theme that's popping up, especially, I think, in the really since quarantine. I think young adult is an area where you can really push the boundaries that maybe adult readers aren't so willing to see, but I think the Gen Zs are really interested in inclusivity and they want to see everybody in their books.
Yes. And
that is a very good point.
I know the book came out right at 2000, at the end of 2019, but it got most of its traction in 2020. Was a book, Blood Air, by Zhao. This was the book that they weren't going to publish because of her views on slavery and how she had written about slavery in the book. It was then revamped, redone. The publisher fixed it and they published it. And it's got a lot of traction in 2020, but it's a fascinating example of where cultural norms and changing cultural norms meet with the publishing world. And you've got to find that sweet spot where you're relevant, but not where you're relevant in leading the discussion, but you're not dragging people to a point and you're not kind of forcing something upon it and making it seem very artificial. And it's a delicate balance to find that spot.
Yeah, I don't envy people that are trying to publish books right now or write music or create art. It's a hard road to follow right now.
It is, and it'll be interesting to see what comes out of it.
So do you want to talk about, like, a few? I see you have a pile of books in front of you, so do you want to talk about a few?
Sure, unless you want to go first.
No, you can go first.
Okay.
You're the guest, Adam.
The book that I would talk about most, and members of staff are tired of me mentioning it, came out in early 2020. It's Kara Natterson's Decoding Boys, New Science Behind the Subtle Art of Raising Boys. I have a boy at home who's right at that age of 13, and this was a book that usually you see these books written for a female audience.
Yes.
How to raise girls. This was the first one that's really going after science-based evidence specifically pertaining to boys. And it's really a guide in getting you into conversations with the young boys in your life and the young men in your life on issues not only of puberty, but of pornography, video games, and gun violence. And it also really speaks to the social norms that a lot of our young boys and young men are living through at the moment. And it will answer the question of why does my son listen to his friends but not to me? So she provides scientific evidence on why that is. So
You have scientific evidence that your
Yes.
son actually does that.
very true. So, and it was because it was one of the first books on the topic, but it's very well done, and it's a very accessible book. And interestingly, the book came out at the same time as podcast by the author, so it's easy to kind of not only read the book, but to see where she's delivered it, where she's used it as guest speakers, and the various audiences that she's delivered this book to. It's a fascinating book.
Interesting. Yeah, I keep meaning to pick that up because I feel like, I mean, I don't have any kids, but I have a niece who's 10, so she's a couple of years younger than your
Yes.
son. But I feel like it's important for like us to see things from that perspective as well.
Yes.
To like boys say this because they're not like, I mean, it's the same old thing. It's just the internet has made things like I just texted my niece the other day. Don't eat hand sanitizer. Like I saw something ridiculous on TikTok and I was like, look, don't do this. I know your friends are going to want you to, but it's not cool. So it's like interpreting all that stuff. And it is very different for boys and girls.
Yes. And this also, where I think the book is most successful, is it's talking about the internet and online activity from almost a very positive position. So it becomes a different way to engage with these issues that a lot of our kids are exposed to pornography at a very early age. As parents, we need to recognize that and provide an outlet for them to talk about that. With video games, it's not the constant message that video games are bad. It's actually looking at saying, why does a child spend 4 hours playing a video game to get through a level, but will tend to very quickly give up on a math problem? A lot of kids tend to give up on a math problem very quickly. And it's that idea that this is a different way to engage with grit and determination and those big issues that we want our young boys and young girls to have. And this does a lot of work on how you can use some things like the internet and online learning to get to that point.
So I was looking at some of the kids and teen books that were coming out this year. And one of the big ones that's been on a lot of the bestsellers lists, and again, talking about that social justice, is this book is Anti-Racist by Tiffany Jewell. So we've just gotten it in. Another one that's come out, and I can't think of who the author is I'm Not a Label.
Yes.
It's sitting behind your
Yes.
desk. So those are kind of making their good, like kid appropriate. And this book is anti-racist. What did I just call it? This book is not a racist. Did I just say that?
I think so.
This book is anti-racist by Tiffany Jewell. Oh my goodness.
Do we have to look
So
that up?
it's, I have it written down and I still got it wrong. It says 11 plus. However, the reviews I've read said you can sit down with like younger kids and it really is a good book to have in your family to start the discussions over some of the things that are happening. Because, of course, we're all having super uncomfortable conversations with ourselves right now. But as so many people have said, if like Black families have to sit their kids down to say, like, be careful, you could get killed out there. We need to have conversations about you can't be racist and you can't, like, what are you going to do to make the world a better place?
And what kind of goes along with that is I think in 2020 we've seen a rise or an increase in the amount of resources that are available for those kinds of discussions. And here at the library, we're doing a brilliant job of just getting that into the collection. Now, sometimes we have a problem of where it fits into the collection.
Yes.
And one that comes to mind is Little Heroes of Color by David Heredia, who I think worked with Pixar and Walt Disney as his background. And this is one that looks at 50 who made a big difference in the world. And it's not just Americans. These are dipping a lot into Latin America, into South America, a lot from Africa, a lot from earlier on in the 20th century. So there's female empowerment, there's racial equality, there's issues of justice. And it's done as a board book. So it immediately kind of falls in that category, is that it could be with board books, but the content is for kids who are a little bit older. And I think a lot of adults would get a lot of benefit out of reading a book that gives you a amazing illustration and a very quick idea of why we need to know more about Benazir Bhutto, why we need to know more about Ernie Barnes. And it's amazing for a list of 50 people. I like to think I'm halfway intelligent. There are a lot of names in this book that I may have heard years ago and didn't know their story, or names that I had not heard before, or stories that I hadn't heard before. And I look at something like this as a fantastic introduction to getting those discussions going on, and not just strictly on race conflict, but also getting into whole ideas of history and literature. How many writers that we don't know about, how many stories that we don't know out of history, how many scientists, tremendous achievements that have been done in South America that we just don't hear about. It's not part of our...
Their names have been erased from the narrative.
Yes, the narratives are different, or we're looking at a completely different narrative when we're not seeing these other components. And this is a fantastic book that is really an introduction to those. And it's very easy to access. It's very bright and pretty, and the pictures are really cute. And some kid is going to pick this up because it's pretty and it's cute. But we're supposed to shelve it in the nonfiction section where most kids aren't looking. And I had said, ooh, I think this would circ better if we put it with the picture books. Right. But I also don't want people to think that I think that these are fictional people. Yes.
Because I want people to pick up this lovely book and borrow it. And so we've decided we're going to leave the nonfiction label on it, but shelve it with the picture books, because I know somebody will pick that up and take it home because it's pretty.
Yes. And also lots of parents or older siblings, if you're looking for a conversation starter with young people, this is certainly well within that category. There's so much good stuff in this. I've
tried to start following a lot of like Instagrammers and booktubers who are helping to diversify collections, to think of inclusivity and diversity when you're buying books for your home as well as for the library. And for us, a lot of times when we get catalogs, we get a title and we get a description, but we don't necessarily get to see a cover.
Yes.
And so I can't always tell what color the person is. Is it a boy or a girl? So following Instagram and booktubers, I can see what people are recommending. I can see the pictures. I can see, oh, that's super cute. I love that. Somebody's going to pick that up. And so I can do a better job of being more inclusive with our collection as well.
Yes. And the other thing that comes with outside the catalogs is a lot of times you're getting the smaller publishers. The ones that are doing very specialized books, but they're kind of getting their voice heard now. That some of this work had been going on, and if it wasn't published by one of the large publishing houses, you wouldn't necessarily see it as quickly in the catalog. So I don't want to identify any publishers who do that, but it's nice to see some of the smaller publishers and some of the work that's been out there kind of now becoming mainstream, or certainly more popular.
What else do you have to talk about, Adam?
I have, in a nonfiction, continuing a nonfiction theme, one is Tyler LeBlanc's book, Acadian Driftwood, One Family and the Great Expulsion. This is one that is started off with, as Mr. LeBlanc explains in his book, he didn't know a lot about his family history. There were some stories, so he did the responsible thing and did an archival search, managed to find a lot of genealogical information, and what he's done is he's repackaged a lot of that genealogical information along with historical data to create a different narrative, a different way to present it. This isn't a book that's full of charts and full of genealogical lines and full of references to where you need to go to find it. He's actually just taken a person from his genealogical background, so someone like Madeline, and just gives an explanation of where she came from, kind of a story that he may have heard from the family that is put onto it, tying it to some of the other resources at the time. And what's really interesting about Acadian Driftwood is it has a lot of references to our own area. So the siege of Fort Beausejour appears in this, the expulsion from Grand Pre appears in this, but there's also plenty of little references and little notes to things that are happening here in our area, or that had happened here in our area on the historical record.
Nice. Another book I won't be reading.
It's a very short book, not saying that, not saying that in a disparaging way. It's from Goose Lane, so it's also a local publisher with a local story, so it's got a lot of interest in it.
Denise will probably read it.
Yes, I hope so.
So I'm trying to think what else, because I'm moving us in a completely different gear. One of the books that I keep seeing coming up on lists for, what to look forward to in 2020 for sort of, I think this is YA, is called The Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas. So I think it's just come out this summer, and it's about a transgender boy who is not really being accepted in his transition with his family. And he's a bruja, which I think is kind of, I don't know if I want to use the word witch. I don't know if that's really appropriate. But I think he can see spirits and raise the dead. And so in order to help him be accepted with his family, he has sought out his cousin who has died recently in the afterlife, but he brings back the wrong boy. And so there's this sort of like a paranormal mystery kind of thing. So it looks really interesting. I kind of want to read it.
The lesson is always do the background research before you raise the dead.
Yeah, I guess so.
How many times have we had to have that lesson brought to our attention?
I guess so. All right, what's next on your list, Adam?
Next on my list is one that, and I'm not saying it to publicize it because Ken Follett certainly doesn't need the attention. It's one of those publishing events. It's his new book, The Evening and the Morning, which is a prequel to The Pillars of the Earth. Now, Pillars of the Earth, I'm just going to sidetrack for a moment, is one of those books. It came out when I was in high school. In high school, I loved medieval history. This fit right into it. It was 12th century, 1100. So it completely was something I was fascinated by. It is a book that I never thought needed a prequel. It has follow-ups. We know the follow-ups. A Column of Fire was the most recent one, and The World Without End came out in 2007. So we've had the story of Kingsbridge from really the Becket murder at the end of the 1100s through to the Elizabethan period. This is one that is going back to really around the year 1000 is how it's being pitched. I haven't read it. I've skimmed through it. I'm a little put off, and I leave it to others to kind of see if they have the same feeling. It is a very disparaging book of the Anglo-Saxon world. We're talking about the Dark Ages going up to the year 1000. As Follett's talking about it, a transition that happens in the year 1000. This is 2 generations before the Norman Conquest, and we know how this story is going to go at that point. This really covers 997 to 1007, so it's a decade right around the year 1000. I don't know if it needed to be a prequel, and I really come back to the point of, it was just last year, the British Library did a fantastic exhibit, a large part of that was available online about the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. It was very quickly sold out. A lot of the material from the British Library was made available online. It certainly blew apart the myth that the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms were Dark Age. Dark Age, I think, got pushed back to 5th, 6th century, the end of the Roman Empire in Britain, the Romans leave, that might be it. Certainly when you get into the 8th, 9th, 10th century, it's hard to talk about those being the Dark Ages, especially after the exhibit from last year. So it's interesting. I don't know if this is a marketing thing that the publishers wanted to do. I find with the whole series, and this is the Kingsbridge series, so this would be a prequel to that series, everyone was based around a key ingredient or a key component of history that had changed at the time. So what you have in Pillars of the Earth is really what is the limit of what the king can do. And in The World Without End is what are the consequences of the Black Death. When you get to the last one, A Column of Fire, it's really what happens after the dissolution of the monasteries. So you can kind of see the conflict he's basing it around. I don't know if he was just trying to echo that. There's lots of obvious conflict that he could have gone to that he didn't. So I don't know if that's to suggest that there's going to be another prequel to The Pillars of the Earth. I hope not.
Of course there is.
Oh, I hope not.
He's got like how many thousands of years to fill in the prequel, Adam?
It's like so many things, and we see this in 2020. This has come up time and time again, is that we've had a lot of the prequels or the books that tell you what happened before.
The Ballad of Songbirds
and Snakes.
There's a book that didn't need to be written either. Who cares about the history of the governor?
And it's the same with all of this. Why are we kind of retreading on these bits? And why
Midnight Sun by Stephanie Meyer.
Yes.
That's not a prequel, but it's basically 700 pages of Edward's side of the story.
The exact same story.
Boring.
From another point of view. So there's no surprise. There's no introspection. It's
700 pages.
And
I thought that was the whole series in one book. No. And I'd also like to point out that until he realizes Bella is his mate or whatever he's calling her, he refers to them all as children.
Oh.
Which is terrible.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you reading something right now? Denise and I.
Right now, I am in a position where a book just arrived a couple of days ago. We don't have it in the library. It's David Carpenter's first volume of Henry III.
Oh, Adam.
This was my research background. This is the part of history I adore. So this is in the Yale English Monarch series. It's a huge book, easily 600 pages, very thin paper. I've got a complaint to the publisher that if you're putting 600 pages, go for the archival paper. People will pay a little bit extra for it. The thin, almost tissue paper, the onion skin paper, not worth it. It's a fantastic book. It's nonfiction. I've only got into a couple of chapters in the past couple of days, but it is thoroughly well researched. And what's interesting is for the 13th century, it's relying a lot more on unpublished sources than on published sources. So this is someone who spent a lot of time in the archives. I met David Carpenter years ago. Fantastic fellow. It's really well done. It's one of those ones that if you're interested in the 13th century, this is the book to read.
Oh, Adam, do you think you'll finish that book before Denise finishes Les Mis?
Oh, yes. How long's it now been with Les Mis?
Well,
she should just listen to the musical and have done with it.
Well, I agree, yeah.
Then do the same with Phantom of the Opera. You can do the whole thing. Just go through all of them.
Is Phantom of the Opera based on like real literature, or did he actually make that up? Not real.
It's based on the book by LaRue.
Oh, so there is actually a real Phantom of the Opera? I didn't know that, Adam. I thought it was strictly musical.
No, there's a book, Phantom of the Opera. It's not as good as you would think it was. Gaston Leroux was the author.
What a shocker. So I'm rereading The Lightning Thief for those of you who don't want to bang your head against 600 pages of
13th century history. English history. This isn't British history. We're not that far. This is strictly English history.
One of the booktubers, she's doing a rereading of the whole series of the Rick Riordan, Percy Jackson and the what, Adam? Is it just Percy Jackson?
Yes.
We'll just say the Percy Jackson series. So The Lightning Thief is the first book in the series. I loved the series. I read the first book. Movie's terrible. Don't even bother with the movie. Just no. Go and get the book. I'm listening to the audiobook. I'm enjoying it so much. It's very funny if you've got like a 12, 13, 14-year-old. Rick Riordan was reading Greek and Roman mythology to his son before he went to bed. And when they ran out of sort of things to read, his son said, well, I want more. And so he started writing Percy Jackson. And I believe Rick Riordan was a junior high teacher.
Yes.
And he used to take it in and read it to his class and ask them for feedback. So the humor is very much like 7-year-old boy humor, which is amazingly good for this series. It's so clever. I just adored it. So I'm really enjoying re-listening to it, and hopefully I'll go a little bit further.
because the Cain Chronicles were the ones that came after with the Egyptian gods.
Yes.
And then he did a series on the Asgardian, the Norse gods, on
Yes,
Asgard.
which is supposed to be amazing.
Yes, and he found interesting linkages through all three of the mythologies. He's also really staying close to what the mythological character is. There's not a lot of changing the nature of the character. Suddenly, if you have a character who is destined for a tragic end in the mythology, that will happen in the series. He doesn't try to polish it, but it also makes it much more, I think, relevant because it's a wonderful introduction to mythology. And for a lot of the mythologies that we don't...
And a very modern, palatable, because I think
Yes.
it's very entertaining. It's not like you're going through 13th century English. It's very nicely done. All right. So we're recording this in advance. So today, when this airs, will be Monday, September the 21st. We are having our first My Two Favorite Librarians book club this evening. If you haven't already, you can email us at information@cumberlandpubliclibraries.ca to register. We'll send you out a Zoom link later in the day. This is our first test one. We have a very small group so far. I'm not sad about that. We had a lot of technical difficulties, and we're going to try it a few times and see how it goes. So if you're interested, email us. Join us for book club tonight at 7 o'clock. Library hours, we'll talk about that next week because they're pretty much the same.
Surprise.
Yeah, it's grab and go in Oxford, Pugwash, and Advocate. And then we're open to the public in Spring Hill, Parsborough, and Amherst. River Hibbert is closed. The Oxford Library is now in the medical center. There's no collection there. It is strictly a pickup. Please call Megan and make an appointment to go in and pick up your holds. You can give her a call. She can place holds for you. That's not a problem. Next week, our hours are going to be changing. We're going to be expanding. We're going to be able to go into more branches and browse the collection, which is great. Knock on wood that nothing happens in between. And I think I should have kept you on for another episode because next week we're talking about mythology.
Awesome.
So we'll see you next week. Not you, Adam.
Oh.
Bye.
My Two Favorite Librarians. Brought to you by the Copper Tree Boutique in Dales Grand Market, located in beautiful, historic downtown Amherst.